Hello everyone, Indro here. In this video I'll walk you through the creation of the Armada Photoshop composition. I created this artwork as a part of my previous video where I showed you how to create edge highlights using inner shadow layer styles. For that tutorial I needed a complex subject like a robot or heavy machinery, and I had to keep the light source at the back for the edge highlights. So I went with these giant robots and a desert sunset. For inspiration, I referred to this scene from Transformers The Last Knight, as it perfectly fits my requirement of giant robots with the sunset. About the composition, it's fairly simple and is made up of all free stock images, so I greatly recommend you go download them and try them out if you want, and then tag me with the hashtag Encreate Showcase on Instagram. I am kind of thinking about showcasing some of your best artworks at the end of my videos. Well then, without wasting any more of your time, let's create it. It all starts with this beautiful sunset highway photo. Let me pause here a bit and share with you the composition rules I followed here. I kept it mainly at the golden rule of third, and I kept the road at the bottom 1/3 of the frame so that I have enough vertical space to play with the scale of the giant robots. Now I also chose this image because it has a beautiful camera angle and the perspective is also super nice, which will help create a cinematic ambience. Next, the image was too dark, so I went into the camera raw filter and tweaked the settings to bring up some details in the dark areas. You can pause here if you want to see the settings I used. Then I created a blank layer and painted it with the color of the sky using a soft round brush to extend and fill up the canvas. Next, I brought in this image of the sky to add some variation and changed its blending mode to luminosity because I plan to keep the cloud textures only and not the blue color. I also masked it here and there as needed. The electric wires and poles in the foreground are getting erased, but don't worry, we'll fix them later. I created a blank layer with the blending mode of multiply and painted with some dark blue-gray color to create a nice vignetting effect and darken up the top region. I also created another blank layer in the blending mode of lighten and painted some sunset orange to create a haze effect. I played with the blend if a little to reveal some darker underlying details. Next, I brought in this car. I also spent quite some time finding the perfect car that somehow matches the lighting, perspective and overall mood of the composition. I cut it out using the pen tool. I quickly color corrected using curves, darkened it up while lifting the blacks a bit, also added a vibrance layer to take away some colors, and added a brightness and contrast to reduce the contrast. Then I took a soft round brush and flattened it using the brush properties to create an elliptical oval-like brush which I used to paint some cast shadows on the road. I also clipped a layer on top of the car and painted some contact shadows. Finally, added some noise to the car to match it to the noise of the overall scene. I also used a selective color layer to take away some blues that were there in the car. Next, I went into the smart object which contained the car and darkened up the interior a bit. It's because the light in our composition is coming from the back and the interior of the car won't be visible that much. Maybe a slight rim highlight would be good. Then I started creating the headlights. On a blank layer with lighten as blending mode, I painted some initial lights. Then on top of it, I created another layer in the blending mode of linear dodge and painted the core of the lights. For the first layer, I kept it to hard light at the beginning, but then at some point changed it to lighten. Here I duplicated the background scene because that will be used to put as an overlay on our robots. Next, it's time to bring in the big robots. This is a beautiful render of a 3D model which I found from DeviantArt. After some quick placement, I started working on the background overlay to separate out the electric poles that should come on top of the robots. I used blend diff to remove the lighter sky and retain the darker electric poles. Then I started fine-tuning the edges manually. I precisely painted on the layer mask to separate out the poles. I created another copy of that layer to extract out the pole to fix the foreground one. I masked it out manually, painting with a brush. Placed it and quickly darkened it up using brightness and contrast adjustment layers. I started color correcting on our battle mech. For that, I started off using a brightness and contrast adjustment layer and darkened it up a lot. I created a blank layer as a clipping mask on top of it to add some haze to create an atmospheric perspective and depth. Now, I have a very detailed video on this topic. The link should be in the description section. You can check it out. I think you'll like it. I painted some dark blue-gray haze on the top and some yellow-orange on the bottom, matching the color of the sky. I also fine-tuned the background overlay layer and removed any unwanted parts. I created some more haze at the distance and on top of the robot. Next, I duplicated the mech along with the color correction and the haze layers for our second and third mechs. I brightened up the sky a bit to make the mechs stand out. I quickly corrected the brightness of the distant mechs and also corrected the haze effect based on their distance. These concepts are clearly explained in my in-depth video about atmospheric perspective and depth. I added some more overall haze in the distance and revealed some underlying details with the blend diff. The distant poles looked a bit too yellow, so I added a layer in the blending mode of color and painted some dark brown colors to correct them. Then I quickly color corrected the pole in the very front and started adding the missing wires. I created a brush with shape dynamics turned on and set the size jitter to fade property. This will help to create thinner strokes as the brush line continues. I quickly did some rough strokes to gauge and set the size. Then I used the pen tool to create the wires and will be using that brush to stroke the path while keeping the simulate brush pressure turned on. Next, I started creating the highlights from the sunset on the robots using the inner shadow from layer styles. Now, this technique and concepts are covered in depth in my previous video, and for that video actually I created this artwork. So I highly encourage you to go and check that video out, and I think it will be helpful. For other highlights, I used my usual technique of adding them using a solid color fill in linear dodge blending mode and painting manually on an inverted layer mask. I added some birds to give a sense of scale. Then it's time to create some headlight reflection on the road. I created a selection using the pen tool and painted within it using a soft round brush. The blending mode is kept to linear dodge and blurred it as required. Duplicated it, transformed and skewed it to fit the angle and the perspective. Next, it's time to add some bloom on the mechs. For that, I created a blank layer in overlay blending mode and painted over with some yellow-orange color of the sunset. Repeated it on all of the mechs, but only in the required areas. Then I added a tiny amount of Gaussian blur to take away some details from the distant robots, because they are at a distance and they won't be that sharp. I also added a little orange tinge on the sky to get a light reflection from the sunset. I blurred the overhanging wires and added some edge lighting on the pole in the front using the same inner shadow technique. Next, I added some overall color toning. I used curves where I lifted the blacks but darkened up the shadows. Added a vignette around the left area and some overall grain. Then I decided to spice up the mix with some red lights. I created 2 red lights on the top antenna and added some soft glow using solid color fill and linear dodge method. I also have a video for this that covers how to make anything glow. If you want, you can check it out. Then I added a little graffiti to customize our mech. I added the text "Let's make peace" and a cute heart on the turret for some satire. I used the blend diff section to blend the graffiti on the metal realistically. Then I thought, why not add some accent lights to make our robots look more menacing. I started with some red circular lights and played by adding a cocktail of layer styles in the form of outer glow, drop shadow, and played with their blending modes to get a red glowing effect. Finally, I switched to little dots and linear lights instead of the circular one. I added a glow on top of it in the same color and keeping the blending mode as color dodge. Added some more decals and increased the contrast by manually painting on a layer with the blending mode as soft light. I painted with the blue-gray on the darker areas, and on the lighter regions I painted with an yellow-orange color. I added a little bit of chromatic aberration and lens distortion as well. Repeated the same process of increasing the contrast by painting manually with the key colors, but this time kept the layers blending mode to overlay. Finally, the perspective of the right foot of the mech was really bothering me as it was shot from the high above, so I went into the smart object containing it, sliced it out and transformed and morphed it as I see fit. but this in turn messed up the highlights and the red accent lightings, so I quickly fixed them as well. Added some more bloom around the sunset, and there you have it. So let me know what you think about the final result. And if you like it, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. That would really help me create more videos like this. Now, if you create some cool artworks, don't forget to tag them with the hashtag Encreate Showcase on Instagram, and I'll try to show them here on my channel. I hope this video helps you. I'll see you on the next one, and till then, enjoy creating.